Hi, welcome to Chapter 4. In this particular chapter, we're going to be looking at students that struggle with speech and language impairments. And hopefully we'll be able to teach you a little bit about what you can do to help these students in your class and to identify those disabilities as they may appear in early childhood. So before we get started, let's look at some of the challenges individuals with speech and language impairments face. This can affect how a person interacts with others in every type of setting. The long-term effects can be quite serious. This can include aggressive behavior, withdrawal, or even a denial of a disability. Many people who have these disabilities may have multiple issues and multiple problems, leading to conditions that are considered to be inaccurate. For some, later on we'll talk about individuals that have cerebral palsy, and because of their speech impairment, they may be misconstrued as having a mental disability. Because a lot of times we do associate speech problems with intellectual problems, and that is definitely not the case. One does not cause the other. When it comes to CP or cerebral palsy, we'll talk later on, this is a disability due to difficulty controlling muscles, and oftentimes can have nothing to do with having an intellectual disability. Here's one person's take on having CP and what not to do. See what you think.
Hi everyone, John W. Quinn here, the author of Someone Like Me. Time for my weekly video blog. And in my hand I hold the top 10 list of things that people have done or said to me once they find out that I have cerebral palsy. Now this is my own personal list. People out there that have cerebral palsy, maybe your list might be different. And I'm sure parents have a different list altogether. But this is my top 10 list of things that have been done or said to me and things not to do to someone, if you see me, top 10 things not to do when you walk up to me learning that I have cerebral palsy. Here we go, number 10. Don't walk up and say, "Wow, you talk real good." Number 9, don't offer to cut up my food. Okay, I've actually had people do that. It's amazing. I'm good with that. Thanks. The number 8 things of the top 10 things not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy. Number 8, don't walk up and say, "CP, is that like MS?" No, it's not. The number 7 thing, don't say to me, "Wow, you have cerebral palsy?" No, you don't. Yeah, I do. The number 6 thing of the top 10 things to not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy. Number 6, don't ask, "Where's your wheelchair?" I know some people with CP that are in wheelchairs. I personally am fortunate enough not to have to use one. Okay, so if I walk up to you, especially walking up to you, don't ask me where my wheelchair is. Number 5, don't ask me, "How much are you getting in disability?" I recently had somebody come up and ask me that very question. I personally don't draw any disability, and it's kind of insulting to ask that question. Thank you. The number 4 thing of the top 10 things to not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy. Number 4, don't ask me if I've ever met Jerry Lewis. I've had people do this and ask me this very question. No, I don't know Jerry Lewis. Thank you very much. The number 3 thing of the top 10 things not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy. Don't walk up and ask, "Hey, what's wrong with you?" I had some woman do this to me in a supermarket a while back, and I looked her square in the eye and said, "Hey lady, how much time you got?" The number 2 thing of the top 10 things not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy. And this is really an insulting thing if you think about it, but don't don't slow down your rate of speech when you talk to me. Okay, I've had people do that. When I say slow down your rate of speech, I'm talking about talking like this. It's very insulting on many different levels. I'm a retired Navy senior chief and a published author. I got you, okay? And the number one thing not to do or say to me once you find out that I have cerebral palsy, I don't want you to lean in and raise your voice because I can hear you just fine. I really can. Okay, I'm not deaf, personally, and don't assume that I am just because I have cerebral palsy. Thank you very much. My name is John W. Quinn. Check out my book, Someone Like Me. Check out my website, johnwquinn.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks a lot. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
All right, remember, that's one person's take on having a disability. Remember to take into consideration multiple perspectives. All right, when we look at speech or language impairments and how are they defined, when it comes to speech and language, these are all fundamental human behaviors. They're the basis for our culture, our commerce, science, and religion. It separates humans from other species. It also affects opportunities and options in American society. We highly value communication. When it comes to the communication process, this allows people to interact and transfer information from one to another. This includes communication signals and announcements of immediate situations or events. It includes communication symbols such as our vocalizations, how we write, how we gesture, or even sign language. And when it comes to the communication process, this is going to require a sender, a receiver, and of course a message. To further define these, when it comes to communication, this is the process of exchanging knowledge, ideas, opinions, and feelings through the use of verbal or nonverbal language. When we look at language, this is a rule-based method of communicating ideas and information and the comprehension and use of signs and symbols. And when it comes to speech, this is the vocal production of language, how we communicate, how we incorporate language through speech. If you see Zippy, remember that's an exam clue. All right, when it comes to speech and language impairments, language impairments can include voice problems, articulation problems, fluency, or stuttering. When it comes to language impairments, this could include problems with phonology, morphology, or syntax. It'd be good for you to look those up in your text and know what those are. When it comes to the content of the message, meaning semantics, or how we actually use language, which is classified as pragmatics, the understanding of an object's purpose or function. Here's a video that'll tell one person's story on how they overcame and coped with stuttering. Hope you find it interesting.
Roughly 4 million Americans and 60 million people around the world stutter. And despite years of research, little is known about the cause. In her new book, Out With It, Catherine Preston tackles some of the myths and misconceptions about it. And today, national correspondent Jamie Gangel has her story. Jamie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Savannah. Growing up in England, Catherine Preston dreamed of a magic cure for her stuttering, a cure that would end the bullying, the laughter, the looks when she couldn't even say her own name. But in writing the story of her life, Preston found something she never expected.
Catherine Preston is smart, funny, and loves to talk.
I do love to talk. I know, exactly.
But at the age of 7, she developed a profound stutter.
Just an everyday person.
P's are hard.
P's are, I know, aren't they?
And has spent her life battling embarrassing moments and myths.
This is not about being shy.
No,
this is
not
not
at all.
about not being intelligent.
No, it's just a brain issue that just isn't quite working in the right way. That's
You're
all
not
it
quite
is.
synced up.
I'm not, yes, exactly. I'm just not quite synced up. There's just something going on with me.
Today, Catherine Preston can laugh about it, but growing up every day was a painful challenge.
The worst as a child is anyone who laughs at you.
To avoid stuttering, she would compensate by using easier words.
You became a human thesaurus.
I did, exactly.
She would even change her own name.
What would you
And-
say your name was?
Oh, anything. Anything that was easy. However, you realize that people out there don't have any idea who you actually are. And that is an unhealthy way to be.
Throughout the years, she tried various forms of speech therapy. Some worked for a while, but then she would relapse.
It just seemed to hamper every way that I wanted to interact with the world.
In her last attempt, she sent an email to coworkers explaining why she was speaking so slowly and loudly, a result of the latest method she was trying. The response she got back was not what she expected. Everyone started telling her their problems.
You sort of became everyone's therapist.
I did for a short time. It was this kind of eye-opening moment of, oh wow, I have a stutter, but everyone else has something else. And it was as if I wasn't alone anymore.
Another empowering moment,
Don't tell me it's my stammer.
watching the King's speech.
Because I have a right to be. I have a voice.
It was acted in such a accurate way. I mean, he is so brave, and I think that it was the first time I'd ever seen a stutterer in the role of a hero.
All of which inspired her to write out with it.
Was it painful to write?
At times. It was hard because you're dragging up memories that have been kind of hidden.
But along the way, there were several pleasant surprises. While researching the book, she met her fiancé, Jeremy Cohen, who also stutters.
Struggles with the web development.
There isn't anything that I'm able to kind of hide from him because he knows all of the depths of stuttering, and he loves me anyway.
Everyone would like a Jeremy.
Everyone would love a Jeremy, but they aren't able to kind of have him. He's all mine.
And Catherine had another epiphany. She came to embrace her stuttering.
You identify yourself as writer, blogger, stutterer, and speaker.
I'm proud of who I am, and even though the word has almost been a swear word for ages, it's actually it's now a pride.
You wear it proudly.
Wear it proud, exactly, out and proud.
What would you like people to take away from this book?
I'd really like everyone to be aware that we all have a voice. We all have a right to be heard, and that we are all perfectly imperfect.
It is such a wonderful book. She is such an elegant writer. The exact cause, Savannah, of stuttering is unknown. Researchers believe there's a genetic and a neurological component. There are speech therapy treatments that some people find very successful, but they don't work for everyone. And at the moment, there is no magic cure. But this book is fabulous.
And
Savannah?
Isn't she lovely? Jamie
She
Gangel,
is.
thank you.
All right, when it comes to the characteristics of individuals with speech impairments, I want you to understand they usually do not include academic problems. However, depending on the severity, the person may have long-term difficulties with self-concept and independence issues. When it comes to language impairments, it could cause language to develop later on, later than expected. It can create academic problems and can cause problems in social and communicative competence, meaning they have difficulty verbally interacting with others. And this will create difficulty mastering reading at all levels. Language has a big impact. When we look at the prevalence, and this is how the rest of the chapters are laid out throughout the rest of your textbook, we look at definitions, we look at characteristics, and then we look at prevalence. And this is how often this disability appears in our society. Well, as far as the prevalence of speech and language impairments, when the primary and secondary disabilities are both considered, speech or language impairments are considered one of the largest special education categories. However, beyond that, students with learning disabilities are the largest disability group overall. There's a strong relationship that exists between early identification of speech and language impairments and later identification of students with learning disabilities. However, when we look at prevalence rates, or when these students get identified, this decreases as children get older. Most of these disabilities are identified in early childhood or early elementary school. After third, fourth grade, this shifts to learning disabilities. So what are some of the potential causes? As you'll see throughout our text, most of the causes of disabilities are unknown. Speech impairments can be the result of brain damage, a malfunction of respiratory or speech mechanisms, miscue of right motor responses, physical or organic problems such as a cleft palate. When it comes to the causes of language impairments, they have multiple causes, including brain injuries resulting from aphasia, otitis media, which could also be ear infections, genetic reasons, hearing impairments, or any environmental factors. And a lot of times these may coexist with other disabilities. You will often hear me refer to the term comorbidity. Comorbidity means having more than one disability at a time. Here are some signs of speech and language impairments that are displayed throughout a video. Hope you find this video helpful.
It can be really difficult for teachers to pick up children with language impairment in a whole class full of children. And every child with a language impairment has slightly different difficulties and strengths within language. But there are signs to look out for, and it's important that teachers are tuned into these. A teacher may spot some difficulties or behaviours that could indicate a language difficulty. So, for example, a child may have difficulties at break negotiating with their peers or maybe understanding the rules of a game. In the classroom, a teacher may feel that the child is forgetful or perhaps a poor listener because they don't seem to be listening to the instructions or carrying out the instructions that they've been given.
Those children who have trouble getting down to their work might be an indication that the language is a problem for them. There are those children who avoid work, sit there staring into space, not finishing the task, perhaps because the language is too difficult for them. And then there are those children who are always looking around the room, copying what the others are doing to make sure that they are on track, and also copy beautifully but don't produce the written work on their own that you might expect them to do.
If a teacher notices a child is blank with some questions, sometimes that means a child doesn't understand or doesn't get it, I guess. And also, if a teacher sees that a child can be quite distracting to other students, it's also, maybe it might be just behaviour, but sometimes it means that the child doesn't get it, so he gets distracted and wants to do other things and might just lose interest in the subject.
There was some occasions when I got really angry that I just walk out the class or something like that. It just came to a point when I just didn't want to do homework because I just felt stupid, and I just looked at the paper, and if I didn't understand question one, I would just put it back in my bag, just go off to my room.
A child with language difficulties might be that child who's very quiet in the classroom, and this could be because the child's struggling to understand, or perhaps is having difficulties explaining and expressing what they want to say.
Really frustrated, and really annoyed with myself because I don't really understand, so I just gave up.
As a teacher, you see the child, perhaps with a language difficulty, who nods at you, who looks as though they understand, and then they come back with a piece of work that bears no resemblance to what you've asked them to do. That child could well have an underlying language difficulty. You want to fill in the gaps and you want to understand what they're trying to say, but if you really listen carefully, you can see when they are not quite making sense, when some of their words are mixed up, or when they get words in the wrong order.
Talking. Yeah, it is easy, but people doesn't really understand it. It all gets jumbled up and splats out.
Those children in their writing who often leave off endings for tenses might be those children with some language difficulties. The children who find it difficult to construct longer, more complex sentences using conjunctions, that might be a sign that they have an underlying language problem. Children who appear to get words in the wrong order, not just missing out words, those also might be ones that you would need to consider as having a language impairment.
The kind of grammar difficulties I had was sometimes I mix up words, because originally I would instead of say taken, I would say tooken, because most people say took, so I added the in at the end because I thought it made more sense.
Examples of the kind of difficulties you might spot is a child saying, I wanted some sweets because I went to the shop, when actually they mean I went to the shop because I wanted some sweets. Or I can buy the toy until the shop opens, rather than I can't buy the toy until the shop opens.
Children with language impairments usually have great difficulty with vocabulary. It might be to do with the subject. So in science, some of the more abstract words, they find it difficult to say them, they find it difficult to remember them, and they find it difficult, definitely, to sometimes pin a meaning to the words.
Sometimes with words, I forget the meaning of a word, but I kind of understand what to do. For example, with a factor, I can't really remember what it means, but I have an idea what you need to do in a maths question for it.
Well, because I didn't do my homework, teachers began to get a bit angry with me, and then it would come to a point when they shout at me, which would make me even more upset, as I'm already a bit depressed as it was. So, yeah, going to school wasn't the best thing.
There are always frustrations for the teacher when a child doesn't seem to be understanding what you have said many, many times, but there is usually a reason for it. It's very important to stop and think that a child wants to do well, is keen to succeed, and therefore that it's something they cannot help, and you might look for an underlying language difficulty.
It's really important that teachers are tuned into these signs of SLI, because once difficulties with language impairment have been identified, with the right support, it can make a big difference to the child's ability to learn in the classroom.
I understand that it might be difficult for teachers to spot, but if they do, it could be really helpful for the student's future and career.
All right, now that we looked at some of the signs, how can we go about preventing students from having speech and language impairments? We do know proper immunization is a key factor. Folic acid during pregnancy can help. Making sure mothers get proper prenatal care and good nutrition. Making sure they have availability of proper medical care and early diagnosis. And making sure we disseminate information about the importance of protecting children from disease. When it comes to assessment, early identification is crucial. we want to make sure we avoid the development of learning disabilities down the road. When it comes to pre-referral, speech and language pathologists, or SLPs, play a vital role in assisting teachers with interventions and instructional procedures that can help determine if special education services are needed to be provided. When it comes to identification, we have to use multiple assessments. We're looking at developmental milestones, we're looking at hearing tests, family questionnaires, formal and informal observations, and then an evaluation process, which looks at the diagnosis of language impairments. And this is another battery of assessments that include parents, staff members, students' history, checklists, developmental scales, multiple ways of assessing students to find out what the real issue is. For more on early identification, here's a video from right around the corner, Akron Children's. Enjoy.
Speech. It's a vital part of human development, learning, and communication. From the moment they are born, infants listen to and watch others in order to develop their own speech and language skills. But sometimes children need assistance building their communication skills. Delays in the development of speech and language are common, and early treatment is vital. Kathleen Considine, clinical coordinator for speech pathology at Akron Children's Hospital, talks about how to identify speech and language delays.
A language delay occurs when the child is not reaching normal developmental milestones. And this is usually something that's identified by a pediatrician or a family practice doctor during well visits. The doctors tend to ask very pointed questions about language development in addition to gross motor and fine motor development.
Like many other skills, all children develop speech and language at their own pace. So it may be normal for one child to acquire certain skills weeks or even months before another child. Even so, there are guidelines that can help you determine whether your child is developing important speech and language skills on time.
There are general developmental milestones for speech and language development, and there is some variability in them, and that's really based on the individual child. But if we would take a 2-year-old child, for example, a 2-year-old child ought to be able to do some simple things like follow a 2-step direction, put together a 2, 3, 4-word phrase on a pretty consistent basis, is able to communicate and make their needs known without very much difficulty. A normal 3-year-old child ought to be able to follow 2-step unrelated directions pretty consistently, ought to be able to recite a nursery rhyme or a simple prayer without any difficulty, answer questions about that. A 3-year-old child can answer simple questions like, what's your name and how old are you and what are you wearing and what you have for breakfast this morning. Would be able to sequence a series of information that's not related, usually about 3 things that are not related, and repeat that back without any difficulty. And a 3-year-old is communicating in 5- and 6-word phrases, is usually pretty grammatically correct with some errors.
Parents should be aware of signs that might suggest a speech or language delay. These can include a child who doesn't respond to sound or vocalizing, an infant who has difficulty sucking or who needs prolonged feeding times, a child who isn't using gestures by the first birthday, a child who still prefers gestures to vocalizations after 12 months, or a child who has trouble imitating sounds after 18 months. A variety of factors can impact speech and language development.
Some of the factors that can lead to a speech and language delay would be, for example, a child with a hearing loss. The child's not going to reproduce speech any better than they're able to hear it. And it doesn't mean the child has a permanent or sensory neural type hearing loss. The child who has a history of otitis media, which is ear infections with associated hearing loss, can lead to speech and language delays. If the child has developmental delays in other areas of his development, for example, with his gross motor and fine motor development, that can be a cause for speech and language development as well. There can be emotional factors that can contribute to that, lack of appropriate stimulation, and so forth. In many cases, we don't really know the reason why, but we do know what we can do to help the child to, enable him to function the way he should for his age.
If a parent suspects a speech and language delay, time is of the essence. Talk to your pediatrician or family doctor about your concerns. Your physician can help you decide whether your child's development is in the normal range or if an evaluation by a speech and language pathologist is needed.
Early intervention is so important because we know that the earlier children are identified with developmental problems, particularly speech and language, the earlier therapy can ensue and the earlier we can get those problems turned around.
As soon as a child is born, parents have opportunities to impact speech and language development. Parents can help children build these important skills by spending time communicating with their child through activities such as talking and signing. They can also read to their child every day, starting as early as 6 months. And throughout their child's development, parents can use everyday situations to reinforce language skills by naming foods in the grocery store or identifying objects when driving in a car. Parents know their children best and are often the first to recognize speech and language delays. If you suspect your child is delayed in his or her development, trust your instincts. Discuss your concerns with your pediatrician or family practice doctor.
All right, when it comes to accessing the general education curriculum, remember these students for the most part don't have any academic issues. The key elements here are to create supportive environments to help language develop. We want to match the language with comprehension abilities of students, making sure we're teaching to their level. We want to be responsive to students' language needs by modifying, adjusting, or supplementing instruction as needed. We want to give students as many examples as possible, provide examples to explain concepts, and we need to use specific references. For example, instead of just saying open your book, you want to say open your geography book to page 36. You want to increase specificity so there's a better chance that they will get your message. And we'll talk later on about giving explicit instruction. This is direct language instruction, and it's going to benefit students with and without disabilities. It's active learning. So when we talk about instructional accommodations, these are things you can do to help your students that may be struggling in class. You want to provide opportunities for them to use language, expanding on comprehension and their receptive language. Make sure you understand the difference between expressive and receptive language in your text. That's a key factor with this group. And you want to create a language-sensitive environment. When it comes to data-based practices, there are a number of reading comprehension strategies that can be used. Check your textbook for specific details. At this point for this class, I just want to make sure you know that there are research practices out there that can help students with a wide variety of disabilities. When it comes to technology, if you haven't checked out my LiveBinder site and all the new exciting applications that are out there, give it a look. There's technology out there that can help our students augment their communication, meaning there's communication devices that can help speak for them if this speech impairment or language impairment is significant. There are also low-tech devices which can include communication boards, and high-tech devices which go as high as speech synthesizers. This technology is all coming down in price. I can tell you when I first started, speech synthesizers or communication devices were between $8,000 and $12,000. Now with the advent of applications on the iPad, that can be significantly reduced to under $1,000. There are also content enhancement strategies that can help organize students' learning. There are a number of graphic organizers I've put on my LiveBinder site, as well as applications on the iPad and on tablets that can help create graphic organizers for students to help them organize information, especially if it's complex. When it comes to transition through adulthood, youth with learning disabilities and speech impairments have better outcomes overall when compared to other disability groups because they fall under the mild to moderate category and can overcome issues of their disability much easier than students with more moderate to intensive disabilities. However, only 68% of students with speech impairments graduates with a high school diploma. That still needs to be drastically improved. When we talk about collaboration, you're going to be doing a lot of collaborating if you're an elementary school teacher with a speech and language professional. Teachers should collaborate to implement speech instruction in their class, enhance learning environments, and enhance the environment for all students, create language-sensitive classroom, and foster generalization of therapy for better results. Here's a video on the role of the speech and language pathologist and how they can help you improve your class lessons.
Most of us take being able to speak for granted. When speech problems arise, we need the professional help of speech-language pathologists.
You ready? Yep.
Sometimes called speech therapists, they diagnose and treat all kinds of speech disorders. For example, stuttering, hearing problems that affect speaking ability, speech difficulty caused by injury or illness, or mental problems that prevent understanding of words and sentences.
So what you have to remember is that there's a breath before everything you're going to say here.
These experts also help those who simply want to improve their speaking skills.
Ooh, oh, oh.
For example, by reducing a strong regional or foreign accent. Many speech-language pathologists work in schools, helping children with speaking disorders and counseling teachers and parents.
Where does SpongeBob live? Under the ocean. Very, very good.
Others treat patients in hospitals, medical centers, private clinics, and nursing care facilities. The work week usually follows standard business hours. The emotional needs of patients and their families can be demanding. In addition to patients, pathologists must be able to explain complex issues in ways that can be easily understood.
He's doing well despite the cold. What I did tell
They need to operate testing devices and diligently record results. Qualifications are a master's degree in speech-language pathology and 9 months of postgraduate clinical work. They must also pass a national examination by the Educational Testing Service. Most states require speech-language pathologists to be licensed. As the elderly population increases, more people become prone to speaking disorders and will turn to speech-language pathologists to help them lead better lives.
Last but not least, we look at partnerships with families and communities. Home environments should help foster language development, and they're going to need to include good role models, many opportunities for students to talk and engage in language, rich and varied experiences, and instructional opportunities. All right, let's review. Let's see what you learned in the last 40 minutes. When it comes to stuttering, stuttering is more likely to occur when the conversation is about a topic of interest, with their same age peers, when the topic is complex or stressful, or when it's in a school setting. Right. When it's more complex or stressful, stuttering increases. All right, here's another one. There's a strong correlation between communication competence and articulation errors, social competence, learning disabilities, and overachievement. Right. There's a strong correlation between communication competence and social competence. Good to know for the upcoming exam. One more. A child who says pay the piano instead of play the piano is demonstrating an example of what articulation error? Remember to consult your textbook. Is this a distortion? Is this an addition? It is an omission? Or is it a substitution? Right, it's an omission. All right, that wraps everything up for Chapter 4. The next chapter will focus on students with learning disabilities. Once again, these are two of the most prevalent areas of disability in our society. And remember, if you ever get a question like what is the most prevalent disability we have, the answer will be students with learning disabilities. All right, thanks for watching. See you again soon.